After 7 years, my husband, the CEO, gave my promotion to his 23-year-old new girlfriend. Nothing personal, he said. The next day I withdrew all 14 of my family's accounts, 58% of their total revenue. When my husband called, begging for mercy, I simply responded, "I want you to hear this from me first," Daniel said, straightening his tie in our bedroom mirror. "The board approved Sierra Taylor for Chief Strategy Officer. She brings fresh perspective." He delivered this news while I stood in my bathrobe, having just returned from driving our daughter Emma to school. 7 years of building his company with my family's fortune, and he destroyed it all with the casual tone someone might use to mention a weather change. He actually had the audacity to add, "Nothing personal, Lydia. You understand, it's just business." I understood perfectly. That's why I smiled, nodded, and waited until his Tesla pulled out of our driveway before I began systematically destroying everything he'd built with my family's money. My hands remained perfectly steady as I walked to my home office. No tears. No screaming. Just the cold clarity that comes when a long-suspected truth finally reveals itself. I opened my laptop and pulled up the 14 separate investment portfolios my family maintained. Each one had been carefully structured over the years, funneling money into Meridian Holdings through different channels. Daniel knew we invested, of course. What he didn't know was that every independent institutional investor he bragged about to the press was actually just another tentacle of the Whitmore family fortune. The Singapore Growth Fund, the Eleanor Trust, Patriot Capital Ventures, Sterling Investment Group. All of them were ours, managed by me, funded by 3 generations of accumulated wealth. Together, they comprised 58% of Meridian's operating capital. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Caroline's number. Daniel's assistant had been leaving me breadcrumbs for months, though I'd chosen to ignore them. The mysterious charges on company cards. The late-night meetings that never appeared on official calendars. The consulting invoices for S. Taylor Associates that started 6 months ago. "Caroline," I said when she answered, "I need you to forward me every S. Taylor Associates invoice from the past year." There was a pause. "Mrs. Clark, I could lose my job." "You won't. I promise you that." 20 minutes later, my inbox filled with documents. $700,000 paid to Sierra Taylor's consulting firm over 6 months. For strategic advisory services. For market analysis. For business development initiatives. All approved by Daniel without board review, using his discretionary fund. A fund that existed only because my mother had insisted on it during the last restructuring. I called Margaret next. My sister answered on the first ring, probably expecting me to discuss Mother's birthday gala. "He gave my promotion to his mistress," I said without preamble. Margaret's silence lasted 3 seconds. Then, "I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there." "I'm not going to cry if that's what you're worried about." "Lydia, I know you. You're not going to cry. You're going to do something far more devastating. Just wait for me." But I couldn't wait. I pulled up Meridian's financial statements, the real ones that only Daniel, the CFO, and I had access to. The company was leveraged to the hilt, floating on credit lines that were guaranteed by what they thought were diverse sources. In reality, every guarantee traced back to Whitmore money. We were the invisible foundation holding up Daniel's glass tower. Emma called from school during her lunch break. "Mom, I forgot my violin music. Can you bring it?" "Of course, sweetheart." Normal. I had to sound normal. "I'll be there in an hour." "Is everything okay? You sound weird." 12 years old and already too perceptive. "Everything's fine. Eat your lunch." After hanging up, I found myself staring at a framed photo on my desk. Our wedding day. Daniel's hand on my waist, my father beside us, beaming. Father had pulled me aside that day. "The Clarks are ambitious people," he'd said. "Make sure you protect yourself." I'd thought he was being old-fashioned. Now I understood he'd seen what I'd been blind to for 7 years. The doorbell rang. Margaret entered without waiting, her judge's robes replaced with casual clothes, her face set in determination. "Show me everything," she commanded. I turned my laptop screen toward her. She studied the portfolios, the invoices, the financial statements. Her expression darkened with each document. "By God, Lydia. He's built everything on your money." "Our family's money," I corrected. "No. Margaret's finger pointed at specific transactions. These signatures are yours. These investment decisions were yours. Mother gave you control of these accounts. You've been the architect all along. The word, architect, stuck in my mind. Daniel called himself the architect of Meridian's success in every interview. The visionary who'd built an empire from nothing. Meanwhile, I'd been the one restructuring debt, securing credit lines, ensuring liquidity during expansions. All invisible. All attributed to his genius. What did Mother say when you managed to secure the Singapore fund? Margaret asked. She said I was maintaining the family tradition admirably. Margaret laughed bitterly. The tradition of standing behind undeserving men. I thought about that tradition. My grandmother, who'd secretly managed my grandfather's investments while he took credit for their wealth. My mother, who'd built the family fortune while my father played golf and attended club meetings. Now me, funding Daniel's empire while he gave my promotion to a woman barely out of business school. Thomas called next. My brother's voice carried the weight of barely contained fury. Patricia just told me what happened. Please tell me you're finally going to end this. I'm reviewing options. Lydia, stop being diplomatic. He's been cheating on you for months. Everyone knows about Sierra Taylor. They've been seen at hotels, restaurants, even at that conference in Miami you couldn't attend because Emma had pneumonia. Miami. 3 months ago. Daniel had sent photos from the conference, alone in his hotel room, claiming exhaustion from presentations. Meanwhile, I'd been holding our daughter's hand in the hospital, managing conference calls between her breathing treatments. How long has everyone known? I asked quietly. Does it matter? What matters is what you do now. After Thomas hung up, I returned to the portfolios. Each account had withdrawal provisions. Clean, legal, immediate. My father had insisted on them, saying liquidity was freedom. I could pull everything out within 24 hours. The documentation was meticulous, the contracts ironclad. I picked up Emma's forgotten violin music and drove to her school. The normalcy of the building, the chatter of teenagers, the smell of cafeteria food. It all felt surreal. Emma met me at the office, accepting the sheet music with a quick hug. Thanks, Mom. Love you. Love you too. Driving home, I passed Meridian's headquarters. The gleaming tower Daniel loved to photograph for his social media. Built from nothing, his bio claimed. I thought about Sierra Taylor, probably sitting in the office that should have been mine, planning her future with my husband using my family's money. That evening I cooked dinner as usual. Salmon with asparagus. Emma's favorite. She chatted about school while I nodded, my mind calculating withdrawal sequences, timing, impact. Daniel texted that he'd be late. Another emergency meeting. I didn't bother responding. Later, alone in my study, I opened a new spreadsheet. 14 accounts. 58% of Meridian's capital. One by one, I began drafting withdrawal notices. Not to send yet. Just to have ready. Each one carefully worded, legally bulletproof, timed for maximum impact. The photo on my desk caught my attention again. Our wedding day. But this time I noticed something different. My father's expression wasn't just joy, it was concern. He'd known even then what I was only now accepting. Some partnerships were never equal. Some sacrifices were never appreciated. Some facades, no matter how perfect, were always destined to crack. The quarterly investor gala sparkled with the kind of artificial brilliance that made my teeth ache. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the ballroom of the Four Seasons, where Meridian Holdings was hosting 300 of its most valued stakeholders. I stood beside Daniel in my burgundy gown, the one he'd chosen because it photographed well, playing the role of supportive wife while he worked the room with practiced charm. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel announced, tapping his champagne flute. Before we continue with tonight's festivities, I want to introduce someone who's been instrumental in our recent strategic initiatives. Please welcome our brilliant new consultant, Sierra Taylor. She emerged from the crowd like she'd been waiting for her cue. 23 years old, fresh MBA from Wharton, wearing a black cocktail dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her confidence filled the space in a way that made other women step back instinctively. Thank you, Daniel, Sierra said, her voice carrying perfectly across the room. I'm thrilled to be working with such a visionary leader. She knew exactly how to hold the microphone, how to angle her body for the photographers, how to pause for effect. But what caught my attention was the smaller details. The way she automatically reached for Daniel's coffee cup to hold it while he adjusted his cufflinks. How she knew to order his drink with oat milk instead of regular cream when the waiter approached. These weren't things you learned in a professional capacity. When I extended my hand to greet her, she held it a beat too long, her green eyes studying me with the detached interest of someone examining a relic in a museum. "Mrs. Clark," she said. "Daniel speaks so highly of your support." "Support. Not partnership. Not contribution. Support." "Miss Taylor," I replied, matching her measured tone. "I look forward to learning more about your consulting work." Daniel interjected quickly, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that felt more like redirection than affection. "Sierra's been analyzing our market expansion opportunities. Revolutionary insights." Later, when I quietly asked Caroline about Sierra's hiring process, Daniel's assistant suddenly became fascinated with her phone screen. "I wouldn't know about that, Mrs. Clark. Mr. Clark handles consultant contracts directly." Caroline had worked for Daniel for 5 years. She'd never avoided my eyes before. The following week, I decided to organize Daniel's home office while he was at his quarterly Palm Beach conference. He'd been complaining about the clutter, and I thought I might find the promotion paperwork he'd promised to file. The Chief Strategy Officer position was supposed to be announced next month. I wanted to review the terms before the board meeting. I searched through every folder, every drawer, every filing cabinet. Nothing. No contracts, no board resolutions, no documentation of the promise he'd made 3 weeks ago. What I did find were receipts. Dinners at restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel charges in the city on nights he'd supposedly been working late at the office. A receipt for Cartier dated 2 months ago. A watch I'd never received. Emma wandered in while I was sitting at his desk, surrounded by papers that painted a picture I didn't want to see. "Mom, are you okay?" I forced myself to smile. "Just organizing Dad's mess." She perched on the arm of the leather chair. "Dad's new friend Sierra is pretty." My hands stilled on the papers. "When did you meet Sierra?" "Yesterday. Caroline drove me to Dad's office after dance class because my phone died and I couldn't call you. Sierra was there. They were looking at something on his computer." She had her hand on his shoulder. Emma paused, picking at a thread on her leotard. "She smells like Dad's new cologne." The cologne. I'd noticed it 3 months ago. Something expensive and unfamiliar that clung to his clothes. When I'd asked about it, he'd said the hotel in Singapore had provided it and he'd liked it enough to buy a bottle. But he'd been home from Singapore for 6 months. "Did Dad introduce you properly?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Not really. He seemed surprised to see me. Sierra said she'd heard so much about me, but she called me Emily at first." That Saturday, the country club's annual charity auction provided the perfect stage for public humiliation. Thomas found me during the silent auction, his expression grim. Patricia stood beside him, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced with something that looked like pity. "We need to talk," Thomas said, guiding me toward the terrace overlooking the golf course. "If this is about the foundation grant." "It's about Daniel." Thomas cut me off. "And that consultant." I straightened my spine. "Sierra Taylor is working on market expansion." Patricia touched my arm gently. "Lydia, everyone's talking about them. They're not even trying to hide it anymore." "I saw them at the St. Regis bar last Thursday," Thomas said. Her hand was on his thigh. "They were sharing a bottle of wine that costs more than most people's car payments." Thursday. Daniel had said he was at a client dinner in Connecticut. I'd spent that evening helping Emma with her science project. A model of the solar system that now seemed like an apt metaphor for my marriage. Distant bodies orbiting around a center that no longer held. "You deserve better than this," Patricia said softly. The whispers followed me through the rest of the reception. Conversations stopped when I approached. Women who'd known me for years offered sympathetic smiles that felt like paper cuts. Men avoided eye contact as if infidelity might be contagious. That night I couldn't sleep. At 8:30 p.m., I told Daniel I was going to Margaret's to discuss Mother's birthday plans. Instead, I drove to Meridian Holdings. The building was mostly empty, just the cleaning crew and security guards who knew me well enough to wave me through without question. The executive floor was dark except for one corner office. Daniel's. As I approached, I heard Sierra's laugh, bright and carelessly young. Through the glass doors of the boardroom I could see them. Presentation slides glowed on the screen, but neither was looking at them. Sierra's hand rested on Daniel's shoulder. His fingers grazed her wrist as he pointed at something on the laptop. The casual intimacy of it, the comfortable body language of people who'd crossed professional boundaries long ago. I stood there for a full minute watching my husband with another woman, feeling something inside me crystallize into cold, hard certainty. Then I pushed open the door. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions like a slot machine trying to find the right combination. Surprise, guilt, then finally settling on defensive annoyance. "Lydia, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing." Sierra didn't even pretend to look uncomfortable. She removed her hand from Daniel's shoulder slowly, deliberately, like she was making a point. Her smile held a challenge. "We're preparing for Monday's board presentation," Daniel said. "It's not what it looks like." The oldest lie in the world, delivered with the confidence of a man who'd forgotten I wasn't stupid. Behind him, the presentation slide showed next quarter's projections. I'd created those projections 2 weeks ago. I turned and walked out of the boardroom without another word, leaving Daniel mid-sentence in his pathetic explanation. My heels clicked against the marble floor with metronomic precision as I made my way to the elevator, each step taking me further from the wreckage of my trust. Behind me, I heard Daniel call my name once, then silence. Sierra's voice drifted after me, something about quarterly projections as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I stood outside the frosted glass doors of Meridian's main conference room, my hand frozen on the handle. Through the distorted glass, I could hear Daniel's voice carrying over the board members' morning chatter. "Before we begin today's agenda, I have an announcement. The Chief Strategy Officer position goes to Sierra Taylor, whose fresh perspective will revolutionize Meridian's trajectory." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Not because I was surprised, after last night I knew this was coming, but because of how easily he said it. 7 years of my work, my strategic planning, my family's money building this company, dismissed in a single sentence. Applause erupted from inside the room. Through the frosted glass, I could see shadows standing, hands coming together in celebration of my replacement. I stood there for a full minute, my wedding ring catching the morning light, suddenly feeling like a shackle I'd locked around my own finger. When the doors opened and Daniel emerged with the board members, he saw me standing there. His step faltered for just a moment before he recovered, approaching me with the cautious gait of someone approaching a wild animal. "Lydia, I was going to tell you." "When?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Look, it's nothing personal." He actually said those words, standing there in his $10,000 suit that my trust fund had paid for. "Sierra brings a different energy. She's more aligned with our future vision." Our future vision. As if I hadn't been the one creating those visions, drafting those strategies, securing the funding to make them real. I bit down hard on my tongue, tasting copper, using the pain to keep myself from screaming in the middle of his precious headquarters. Richard Brennan, the CFO, passed by us, and I caught the flash of pity in his eyes before he looked away. They all knew. Every one of them had sat in that room and applauded my replacement while knowing exactly whose money kept their paychecks coming. I left without another word, my legs somehow carrying me to the parking garage, then to my car, then onto the highway. My hands shook as I drove, and I found myself pulling into Margaret's driveway without consciously deciding to go there. My sister took one look at my face and pulled me inside. The story poured out of me in broken sentences while she poured wine with a generous hand. "That bastard," Margaret said, pacing her kitchen with volcanic energy. "That ungrateful, philandering piece of..." She unleashed a string of expletives that would have made our mother faint. "I'll pull every cent our family has invested. Every single penny. Let's see how his little girlfriend handles a company with no funding." She was already reaching for her phone when I stopped her. "We need to call Mother first." Margaret paused, her finger hovering over the screen. We both knew what that meant. Eleanor Whitmore didn't do emotional reactions. She did strategic responses. Mother answered on the second ring as if she'd been expecting our call. Margaret put her on speaker and I told the story again, more coherently this time. The silence that followed felt like judgment. "I see," Mother finally said, her tone arctic. "And you're just learning about this relationship now?" "There were signs," I admitted. "I chose not to see them." "Yes," she said simply. "You did." Her disappointment cut deeper than Daniel's betrayal. She had warned me in her way. All those careful questions about whether Daniel was treating me well. The observations about how tired I looked. She had seen what I had refused to acknowledge, and now I had proved myself a failure in the one arena Whitmore women were supposed to excel: protecting our assets. A Whitmore woman doesn't crumble, dear, she continued, her voice carrying the weight of generations. We strategize. Come to the estate tomorrow morning. Bring Margaret. And bring every financial document you have regarding Meridian Holdings. 2 days later, I stood in my own backyard, watching Emma's 13th birthday party slowly deflate like a punctured balloon. Daniel was an hour late. The ice cream cake was melting. Emma kept checking the driveway, her disappointment visible in the slump of her shoulders. When his Tesla finally pulled in, my stomach dropped. Sierra Taylor stepped out of the passenger side. Sorry we're late, Daniel announced as if the we was perfectly normal. Sierra and I had an urgent business matter to discuss. The backyard went silent. 12-year-olds stared at the woman young enough to be their older sister. Parents exchanged glances. Emma's face crumpled, then smoothed into a mask I recognized, the same one I wore when pretending everything was fine. My mother-in-law Dorothy, who had spent 7 years making subtle digs about my family's new money, actually walked over and put her arm around my shoulders. Shameful, she murmured loud enough for others to hear. Sierra approached Emma with a wrapped gift, her smile bright and false. Happy birthday. Your dad told me so much about you. The gift was Chanel No. 5, a perfume so obviously inappropriate for a 13-year-old that even Daniel should have noticed. But he was busy with his phone, taking photos of the party, his fingers already moving to post them on Instagram. I watched him type #family first and wanted to throw his phone into the pool. Emma accepted the gift with polite confusion, looking between Sierra and me. Her friends whispered behind their hands. One parent gathered their child and left early, citing a forgotten appointment. Daniel remained oblivious, chatting with Sierra about market projections while standing next to the birthday cake. She laughed at something he said, her hand briefly touching his arm, and I saw Emma notice. My daughter's eyes met mine across the yard, and in them I saw understanding dawning. 3 days later, Caroline caught me in the Meridian parking garage. Daniel's assistant looked around nervously before approaching, a manila folder clutched against her chest. Mrs. Clark, I'm resigning tomorrow, she said without preamble. I can't watch this anymore. She thrust the folder into my hands. Inside were receipts, printouts, emails. A paper trail of betrayal dating back 6 months. Jewelry charges from Tiffany that I'd never received. Hotel bills for nights Daniel claimed to be at conferences. Email threads between him and Sierra with timestamps from when he was supposedly in meetings. There's more, Caroline said, her voice dropping. You funded everything. Every major deal, every expansion, every acquisition. It all came from your family's accounts. The board knows it. Daniel knows it. She paused, seeming to gather courage for the final blow. They laugh about it, Mrs. Clark. In the executive meetings. They call you the silent partner, and make jokes about how you don't even know what you're funding. Her eyes filled with tears. You deserved to know. Caroline's folder sat on my desk like evidence at a crime scene. I waited until Daniel's breathing deepened into his familiar snore before slipping out of bed. The house felt different in darkness, every shadow holding secrets I'd been too trusting to see. I closed the study door behind me with practiced silence and opened my laptop. The screen's glow illuminated Caroline's collection alongside my own financial records. I started with the family accounts, pulling up dashboards I'd managed for 7 years. Whitmore Trust, Eleanor Holdings, Patriot Capital, Sterling Investments. Each one appeared separate on paper, independent entities investing in a promising company. The truth was far simpler and more damaging. They were all ours, tentacles of the same family fortune. I traced each wire transfer, each investment round, each emergency loan that had saved Meridian from collapse. The numbers made my breath catch. $47 million over 7 years. Not a partnership, not a mutual investment. A one-way flow of Whitmore money into Daniel's ambitions. My fingers moved across the keyboard with increasing speed, screenshotting everything. Bank statements. Transfer confirmations. Board resolutions that showed Daniel knew exactly where the money originated. He'd signed papers acknowledging Whitmore Trust as a cornerstone investor. He'd personally negotiated terms with Eleanor Holdings, which was literally named after my mother. The Singapore fund alone had provided $8 million during the expansion crisis 2 years ago. I remembered that night. Daniel pacing our bedroom talking about bankruptcy, about losing everything. I'd made 3 phone calls, moved money from 2 family trusts, and by morning Meridian had its lifeline. The press release credited Daniel's brilliant negotiation with international investors. The investor was me, sitting in my pajamas at the same desk. Dawn crept through the windows as my documentation grew. Folder after folder of evidence showing that Meridian Holdings wasn't built on Daniel's genius. It was built on 3 generations of Whitmore wealth, managed by me, credited to him. My coffee had long gone cold, but I barely noticed. For the first time in months, possibly years, I felt completely clear. Thomas called at 7 in the morning. "Can you meet me downtown?" "Not at the family firm. Somewhere discreet." An hour later, I sat across from him in a conference room at Brenner & Associates, a law firm that specialized in corporate litigation. Thomas had already been busy. 3 lawyers sat with us, their expressions serious. "Show them what you showed me," Thomas said. I spread out the evidence. The 14 accounts. The $47 million in transfers. The paper trail showing Daniel's full knowledge of the source. The lawyers exchanged glances as they reviewed documents. "Every contract has an immediate withdrawal clause," the lead attorney, Jennifer Brenner, said after 20 minutes of silent reading. "Breach of fiduciary trust. It's ironclad. You can pull everything." "How quickly?" I asked. 24 hours notice is all that's legally required. But if you want maximum impact." She pulled up a calendar on her tablet. "The next board meeting is in 72 hours. If you move before then, you control the narrative." Thomas reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "The entire family is behind you, Lydia. Margaret, me mother. Even cousin Robert, and you know how he feels about family drama." "There's something else," Jennifer added, sliding a folder across the table. "We pulled precedents. Similar cases where family investors reclaimed funds from companies that violated trust agreements. In 3 cases, the investors didn't just withdraw. They took controlling interest as compensation for breach. The possibility hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Not just leaving Meridian crippled, but taking it entirely. "Think about it," Thomas said. "But if you're going to move, it has to be now." That afternoon, Mother summoned me to the family estate. The library hadn't changed since my childhood, heavy with the smell of leather and old paper. Portraits of 5 generations of Whitmores watched from the walls. My great-great-grandfather who'd started with shipping. My grandfather who'd survived the crash of '29 by being cautious when others were greedy. My father whose keen eyes seemed to follow me as I sat across from Mother. "Your father faced something similar once," Eleanor said, her fingers tracing the edge of a crystal paperweight. "His business partner, Harold Manning. They built a telecommunications company together in the '80s. I knew the company. It had made our family's second fortune before being sold to a conglomerate. Harold forgot whose money had built the empire," Mother continued. "Started making decisions without consultation. Started believing his own press about being a visionary." She stood, moving to a portrait I'd barely noticed before. A stern-faced man with calculating eyes. "That's Harold. I don't understand. Why is his portrait here?" Mother smiled, the expression sharp as winter. "Because your father didn't just withdraw support. He acquired Harold's shares during the crisis that followed. We own the building his portrait came with." She moved to an antique safe hidden behind a false bookshelf. "Your grandfather insisted on provisions after 1929. Protections that would prevent the family fortune from being misused by outsiders." The documents she pulled out were dated 1987, but attached were modern amendments. Clauses I'd never seen. Powers I didn't know existed. "The family trust has override provisions," Mother explained. "If funds are being misused or misrepresented, the trustee, that's you dear, can not only withdraw but can claim damages. Substantial damages." "Daniel doesn't know about these?" "Of course not. These are Whitmore protections. He was never truly family, was he?" Her eyes gleamed with something that might have been pride or vengeance. "It's time to be a Whitmore, Lydia. Your father would expect nothing less." That evening, I sat with Emma at the kitchen table helping her with algebra homework. She was struggling with a problem about compound interest, ironically enough. "Mom," she said suddenly, pencil suspended over her worksheet. "Sierra says she and Dad are going to get a big house." My hand stilled on the calculator. "When did Sierra tell you this?" "Yesterday when Dad brought her to pick me up from dance. She said after some business thing next month they're moving. She asked if I wanted to decorate my new room." Emma's voice was carefully neutral, but I heard the confusion underneath. "She said she's going to be my new mommy soon." The calculator slipped from my hand. "What did you say?" "I said I already have a mom." Emma looked up at me, her young face serious. "Dad got mad and said I was being rude." I pulled her into a hug, feeling her tremble slightly. "You weren't being rude, sweetheart. You were being honest." Later, after Emma was asleep, I found Daniel's personal laptop open on his desk. He was getting careless, leaving it unlocked. The browser showed recently viewed pages. Real estate listings in Connecticut. 5-bedroom houses in Sierra's name. The funding source listed for the down payment made my blood run cold. It was labeled performance bonus, but the amount matched exactly what I was set to inherit from my grandmother's trust next month. He wasn't just betraying our marriage. He was planning to steal from our daughter's future, using money 3 generations of Whitmore women had preserved. I closed Daniel's laptop carefully, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd discovered. The performance bonus matching my grandmother's trust. Sierra's name on property documents. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. It was financial fraud waiting to happen. I photographed every screen before clearing the browser history, leaving no trace of my discovery. At 4:47 a.m. 3 days later, Margaret's home office looked like a command center. She'd taken a week's leave from her judicial duties, claiming a family emergency. Thomas arrived with 2 laptops and a briefcase full of documentation. The 3 of us hadn't been united like this since our father's funeral. Margaret had printed every contract, every investment agreement, every legal document connecting our family's money to Meridian Holdings. They covered her entire dining table in neat rows, color-coded with sticky notes marking key clauses. Thomas set up his laptops, one showing market data, the other displaying legal precedents. 14 accounts, I said, laying out my own documentation. 58% of Meridian's operating capital. "We need to draft the withdrawal notices tonight," Thomas said, pulling up a template on his screen. "Each one has to be perfect. No legal challenges, no room for Daniel to maneuver." Margaret stood over the contracts, reading glasses perched on her nose. "The language has to trigger the immediate withdrawal clause. Breach of fiduciary trust. Misrepresentation of fund usage. Violation of investment terms." We worked in focused silence for 2 hours, crafting each notice with surgical precision. The Singapore Fund. The Whitmore Trust. Eleanor Holdings. Patriot Capital. Each withdrawal had to stand alone legally while creating a cascade effect financially. "Stagger them," Thomas advised, looking at the timeline we'd mapped out. 9 to 9:15. If they all hit at once, it could trigger automatic fraud holds. The system might think it's a cyber attack. "Smart," Margaret agreed, then her eyes lit up with something almost gleeful. "We should copy the SEC on everything. Full transparency. Let them see exactly where Daniel's miracle growth came from." "That's brilliant," Thomas said. "It prevents him from spinning this as a technical glitch or misunderstanding. The regulators will have questions." I thought about the implications. The SEC involvement would make this public, would destroy any chance of reconciliation. But reconciliation had died the moment Daniel decided to steal my grandmother's trust fund for his girlfriend's house. The next afternoon, I sat across from Richard Brennan at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from his daughter's elementary school. He'd chosen the location, neutral territory where no one from Meridian would spot us. Richard had been CFO since before Daniel's time, a numbers man who'd watched the company transform. "Thank you for meeting me," I said. Richard stirred his coffee slowly, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Caroline told me she gave you documents before she quit." "She did. I've wanted to say something for years," he admitted, not meeting my eyes. "I've watched Daniel take credit for your strategies, your negotiations, your family's money. The board knows the truth, but they're all getting rich off your family's investments. No one wants to rock the boat. I pulled out my tablet showing him the documentation I'd compiled. The 47 million in transfers. The 14 accounts. The withdrawal notices ready to deploy. His face grew paler with each slide. This would destroy Meridian overnight, he whispered. I leaned forward. Unless the board makes the right choice. What choice is that? Daniel steps down. Sierra is terminated. The board acknowledges the true source of Meridian's funding. You have one chance to be on the right side of this, Richard. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. My daughter's college fund is tied up in Meridian stock options. If you stand with the board when this happens, you'll lose everything. If you help me transition leadership properly, I'll ensure your position is protected. Richard nodded slowly. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. Daniel's planning to formally announce Sierra's promotion then. I know. I won't be there. He looked confused, but I didn't elaborate. Let him wonder. That evening, I attended Meridian's company softball game at the local park. The perfect corporate wife won last time. I'd baked cookies from scratch. Daniel's favorite chocolate chip recipe. I wore the sundress he'd bought me for our 5th anniversary, the one he said made me look like the woman he'd fallen in love with. Lydia. Several employees greeted me warmly. They had no idea their paychecks were about to evaporate. Daniel hit a double in the 3rd inning and I cheered louder than anyone. Sierra was notably absent, probably preparing for her big promotion tomorrow. I mingled, laughed at bad jokes, took photos for the company newsletter. Every interaction felt like a goodbye. During the 7th inning stretch, Daniel jogged over, sweaty and grinning. Thanks for coming, babe. Means a lot. Babe. He hadn't called me that in 2 years. Wouldn't miss it, I said, handing him a water bottle. Listen, about tomorrow's board meeting. I can't make it. Emma has an orthodontist appointment. The lie rolled off my tongue smoothly. I'd scheduled the appointment that morning, my alibi locked in place. That's fine, he said, looking relieved. It's just routine stuff anyway. Routine. Like destroying our marriage and stealing our daughter's inheritance. At dinner, I made his favorite meal, the exact one I'd cooked the night he proposed 8 years ago. Beef Wellington with roasted vegetables and garlic mashed potatoes. Emma chatted about her science project on renewable energy while Daniel scrolled through his phone, occasionally grunting responses. This is amazing, Mom, Emma said, savoring the Wellington. What's the special occasion? No occasion. Just felt like cooking something nice. Daniel looked up from his phone briefly. It's good, he said, already texting again. The screen reflection in his glasses showed Sierra's name. I watched them both, memorizing this moment. Emma's innocence, still unaware her world was about to shatter. Daniel's casual arrogance, texting his girlfriend while eating the meal I'd made with hands that would destroy him tomorrow. I love you both, I said suddenly, the words escaping before I could stop them. Emma beamed and came around the table to hug me. Love you too, Mom. Daniel just nodded, already typing another message. Yeah, love you too, he said absently. That night, I waited until Daniel was showering to forward screenshots of his private emails about Sierra to Jennifer Brennan's secure server. Messages about their future plans, about the transition, after her promotion, about the house they'd viewed together. Evidence for the divorce that would follow tomorrow's financial catastrophe. When Daniel climbed into bed, I surprised us both by reaching for him. He responded eagerly, probably thinking about Sierra the entire time. Afterward, as he drifted off to sleep, I studied his face in the moonlight. The strong jaw I'd once found attractive. The lips that had promised to honor and cherish. The hands that would soon be signing resignation papers. At 1 a.m. I slipped out of bed and walked to my study one final time. The 14 withdrawal notices sat in my draft folder, scheduled to send between 9 o'clock and 9:15 a.m. I verified each one, checked the timestamps, confirmed the SEC copies were attached. My finger hovered over the confirmation button. Once I clicked this, there would be no going back. 7 years of marriage, 13 years together, Emma's intact family. All of it would end with this click. I thought about Sierra's hand on Daniel's shoulder. About nothing personal. About the $47 million of my family's money funding his ego. I clicked confirm. The confirmation screen disappeared and I closed my laptop with the soft click of finality. There was no undoing what would happen in 8 hours. I returned to bed, sliding beneath the covers next to Daniel's sleeping form. He mumbled something unintelligible and turned away, taking most of the blanket with him. I let him have it. He would need all the comfort he could get soon enough. Sleep never came. I watched the ceiling fan spin lazy circles through the darkness, counting rotations like a meditation. At 4:30 a.m. I gave up pretending and slipped out to the kitchen. The house felt different in these pre-dawn hours, as if it knew everything was about to change. By 5 a.m. I sat in my study with the doors locked, 3 monitors glowing before me. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar morning song, but today I drank it black. No cream, no sugar, nothing to soften the bitter edge. Daniel's elaborate oat milk lattes seemed ridiculous now, like everything else about the performance of our marriage. Each monitor showed different account dashboards. 14 windows arranged in a grid, displaying millions of dollars ready to vanish at my command. The withdrawal notices sat in my email system, scheduled and waiting. I reviewed each one methodically. The Singapore Growth Fund, 8 million. Eleanor Holdings, 12 million. The Whitmore Trust, 6 million. Numbers that represented not just money but years of my family's careful accumulation, generations of women who had built something real while their husbands took the credit. Through the study window, I watched the sky lighten from black to deep purple to the first hints of orange. Somewhere in the city, Daniel's board members were probably getting ready for their day, checking their phones over coffee, reviewing notes for the meeting where they would rubber stamp Sierra's promotion. Richard Brennan would be among them, knowing what was coming but bound by his own interests to stay silent until the moment arrived. At 7 a.m. Daniel's alarm went off. I heard him moving around upstairs, the shower running, his electric toothbrush humming. The familiar sounds of a morning routine that would never be routine again. He came downstairs whistling, actually whistling while adjusting his tie. "You're up early," he said, poking his head into my study. "Couldn't sleep," I replied truthfully. "Big day today." He grinned, and for a moment I saw the man I'd married. Ambitious, confident, completely unaware of anyone's contribution but his own. "The board's going to love what Sierra and I have planned for the Asian expansion." Sarah and I. Not even pretending anymore. "I'm sure they will," I said. He grabbed his travel mug, the one Emma had given him for Father's Day that said, "World's Best Dad," and headed for the door. "Don't wait up tonight. Might be late celebrating." The door closed behind him with a satisfied thud. I listened to his Tesla pull out of the driveway, then returned to my screens. 7:47 a.m. Just over an hour until the first notice would send. Emma came downstairs at 8:15, already dressed for school. She hugged me from behind as I sat at my desk. "You okay, Mom? You look tired." "Just a lot on my mind, sweetheart." "Is it about Dad and that woman?" I turned to face her, seeing too much understanding in her 12-year-old eyes. "What makes you say that?" "I'm not stupid, Mom. Everyone at school knows. Jennifer's mom saw them at a restaurant last week." She paused, then added quietly, "Are you getting divorced?" The question I'd been avoiding. "I don't know yet. But whatever happens, you're my priority. Always." At 8:45 I walked Emma to the school bus, hugging her longer than usual. "I love you," I whispered into her hair. "Love you too, Mom. Everything's going to be okay." If only she knew how very not okay things were about to become for her father. I returned to my study at 8:55. 4 minutes. My hands were perfectly steady as I positioned them over the keyboard. The familiar weight of my wedding ring caught my attention. I twisted it off and set it beside the mouse. That felt better. 8:58. I pulled up Meridian's internal system using Caroline's access codes. She'd given them to me before leaving, perhaps knowing I'd need to watch the destruction in real time. The dashboard showed normal morning activity. Emails flying. Calendar invites updating. The board meeting starting in 2 minutes. 8:59. I thought of my father's favorite quote, the one he'd painted on a piece of driftwood that still hung in Mother's study. "Fortune favors the bold." He'd said it before every major business decision, every risk that had built our family's wealth. "Fortune favors the bold," I whispered. 9 a.m. The first notice sent. Whitmore Trust's 8 million vanished from Meridian's operational account. The withdrawal processed instantly, funds transferring back to our family holdings. 9:01. Click. Eleanor Holdings' 12 million disappeared from their expansion fund. 9:03. Click. Click. Two more accounts withdrew simultaneously. By 9:07 I watched Meridian's internal system explode with alerts. Red warning boxes cascaded down the screen. Urgent. Whitmore Trust withdrawing. Emergency. Eleanor Holdings terminating agreement. Critical. Multiple account closures detected. Through the baby monitor I'd never removed from our bedroom. A secret Daniel never knew about. I heard his phone start ringing at 9:09. He'd left it charging on his nightstand, probably planning to retrieve it after the meeting. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Then immediately rang again. 9:11. Click. 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 Three more accounts emptied. The internal system showed chaos. Emergency emails fired off to every executive. The CFO's status went from in meeting to urgent reviewing crisis. Board members' calendars suddenly blocked off for emergency financial review. 9:15. The final notice sent. 14 accounts, $47 million, 58% of Meridian's operating capital, gone. I closed the laptop and watered my orchids with the careful attention of someone with nothing but time. The plants were thriving, their white blooms perfect and untouched by the chaos I'd just unleashed. My phone, deliberately left in the bedroom, began ringing. I could hear it through the monitor. Daniel's ringtone playing over and over. At 9:30, I drove to Emma's orthodontist appointment, making pleasant conversation with the receptionist about the weather, ensuring she would remember seeing me. Creating my alibi while Meridian Holdings discovered that their foundation had been built on sand. The orthodontist's waiting room had a television playing the morning financial news. At 9:45, a breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Meridian Holdings stock halted pending major announcement. I smiled behind my magazine. My phone, now with me, showed 17 missed calls from Daniel. The voicemails escalated in tone with each message. The first, confused, "Lydia, something's wrong with the accounts. Call me." The fifth, angry, "What did you do?" The 10th, desperate, "Please, we can talk about this." The last at 9:52, "I'm coming home. We need to talk." But I wouldn't be home. At 10:15 I left the orthodontist and drove straight to Meridian Holdings. It was time to see the destruction firsthand. Time to walk through the lobby of the empire I'd funded and watch it crumble. I wore the black suit from our wedding rehearsal dinner, the last time I'd truly believed Daniel and I were partners. It seemed appropriate for another kind of funeral. The parking garage at Meridian Holdings was nearly empty when I pulled in at 10:30 a.m. Most employees would be in the emergency all-hands meeting, trying to understand why their company had just lost over half its operating capital. I took the executive elevator using my keycard for what might be the last time. The doors opened directly onto the boardroom floor. The scene inside was barely controlled chaos. Board members hunched over laptops and phones, voices raised in urgent discussion. Papers scattered across the usually pristine conference table. Coffee cups abandoned and growing cold. At the center of it all, Daniel stood gesticulating wildly at Richard Brennan, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Sierra sat in what should have been my chair, but her designer confidence had evaporated. She clutched her phone with both hands, mascara slightly smudged, her perfect composure cracking under the weight of a crisis she didn't understand. Daniel saw me first. His entire body sagged with relief and he rushed toward me. "Lydia, thank God. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them you didn't mean to." I walked past him without acknowledgement, moving toward the head of the table where Board Chairman Wallace sat rubbing his temples. The room fell silent as I positioned myself where everyone could see me. 58% of Meridian's funding came from my family's 14 accounts, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "I've withdrawn it all." The eruption was immediate. Board members shouting over each other, phones ringing, someone's laptop crashing to the floor. Through it all, Sierra's voice cut through with a question so naive it almost made me laugh. "Can she even do that? Isn't that illegal?" I turned to face her slowly, letting the full weight of my attention fall on her for the first time. "Little girl," I said, my voice soft but carrying clearly, "I own the ground you're standing on. The chair you're sitting in. The salary you thought you'd earned. Everything here exists because my family allowed it to exist." Wallace pounded his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "Everyone please. Mrs. Clark, We need to understand what's happening here. I pulled out my tablet, connecting it to the presentation screen. The documentation appeared in devastating clarity. Wire transfers. Account statements. The $47 million trail leading from Whitmore Holdings to Meridian's accounts. Every major deal. Every expansion. Every crisis that Daniel solved. Funded by my family's money. Money he knew came from us but reported to investors as diverse institutional funding. That's not, Daniel started, but Wallace cut him off with a sharp gesture. Is this accurate, Richard? Wallace asked the CEO. Richard Brennan straightened in his chair. Every word. I have the documentation to verify it. The board members exchanged glances, the reality of their situation sinking in. Without Whitmore money, Meridian was essentially insolvent. What do you want? Wallace asked me directly. I had waited 7 years for this moment. My terms came out clear and non-negotiable. 1. Daniel resigns immediately. Not next month, not next week. Today. 2. Sierra Taylor is terminated with cause, no severance, no references, no golden parachute. 3. I assume full control with 51% voting shares and complete restructuring authority. The board lawyer, a nervous man named Peterson, started stuttering about precedent and corporate governance, but Richard interrupted him. She's offering to save the company, Richard said firmly. Without the Whitmore money, we're bankrupt by Monday morning. The stock won't survive the opening bell. Daniel's face had gone from red to white to an unhealthy gray. You can't seriously be considering this. I built this company. Wallace, who I knew played golf with my mother every Sunday at the country club, finally showed his cards. Mr. Clark, he said, his tone formal and final, you've lost the board's confidence. These are reasonable terms given the circumstances. Sierra stood abruptly, grabbing her bag. This is insane. I'm leaving. Stay, I commanded, and something in my voice made her freeze. Stay and watch what happens when you try to steal from a Whitmore woman. Consider it a free education in consequences. She sank back into the chair, her face flushed with humiliation. The board voted within 10 minutes. Unanimous approval of all 3 terms. Daniel would resign. Sierra would be terminated. I would assume control. That evening, Daniel found his way home at 10 p.m., looking like he'd aged 10 years in 12 hours. I was in his study, my study now, reviewing Meridian's restructuring plans that I'd been secretly developing for months. He stood in the doorway, swaying slightly. Not drunk, just destroyed. Lydia, please. His voice cracked on my name. 7 years. 7 years has to mean something. Then, in a move I didn't expect, he dropped to his knees beside my chair, grabbing my hands before I could pull away. I made a mistake, he said, tears actually forming in his eyes. Sierra means nothing. He was just, you're my wife. Emma's mother. The woman I married. I pulled my hands free and turned my laptop screen toward him. The property listings in Sierra's name filled the screen. The house in Connecticut funded by his performance bonus. You were planning to leave anyway, I said. I just accelerated your timeline. His tears dried instantly, replaced by desperate calculation. I'll give you everything. The house. Full custody of Emma. My entire stake in Meridian. I'll resign quietly, disappear, never contact you again. For a moment I considered it. A clean break. No public humiliation. But then I remembered the board meeting where he'd announced Sierra's promotion. Nothing personal. You'll resign publicly, I said. Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. A press conference where you take full responsibility for the financial mismanagement. You'll praise my leadership and recommend me as your successor. That will destroy my reputation. Yes, I agreed. It will. At 11 p.m., Wallace convened an emergency shareholder video conference. Investors from New York, London, Tokyo, all demanding explanations for the day's chaos and the stock halt. Daniel sat beside me but couldn't form coherent sentences. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I took over smoothly. Meridian Holdings has been built on a foundation of Whitmore family capital, disguised as diverse investments. Due to executive malfeasance and breach of fiduciary duty, these funds were withdrawn today. The lead investor from New York, a sharp-faced woman named Chin, leaned forward. And the path forward? I'm prepared to reinvest the full amount under new leadership structure. What leadership? Chin asked. I smiled. Me, of course. The vote was swift and unanimous. Even Daniel's former allies, seeing the writing on the wall, voted for my appointment. At 11:47 p.m., Daniel signed the resignation papers, his hand shaking so violently that his signature was barely legible. The next morning brought Sierra's final humiliation. She arrived at Meridian at 8 a.m., probably hoping to clear out her office before the press conference. Instead, she found security already boxing up her belongings, her keycard deactivated, her company laptop locked. She called Daniel repeatedly, but he didn't answer. He was at home, packing his own belongings into boxes I'd thoughtfully provided. When she tried to storm into the lobby, demanding to speak to someone in charge, she found me waiting. You can't do this, she screamed, all professional pretense gone. I'll sue. I'll go to the press. You signed an NDA as a consultant, I reminded her calmly. Violate it and I'll ensure you never work in finance again. Your MBA won't mean much when every firm in the country knows you as the woman who tried to steal from the Whitmores. Security escorted her out as employees gathered to watch. When the doors closed behind her, someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire lobby erupted in applause. The applause from the employees lingered in my ears as I walked back through Meridian's lobby, past the spot where Sierra had made her undignified exit. I stopped at the reception desk where our receptionist, Maria, sat with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Clark, I mean Ms. Whitmore, she corrected herself, using my maiden name that I'd officially reclaimed that morning. Thank you. That woman treated us all like servants. Mr. Clark never saw it, but we did. 3 months had passed since that day, and now I stood at the head of Meridian's boardroom for our quarterly review. The same room where Daniel had announced Sierra's promotion felt different now. Natural light streamed through windows I'd had uncovered. Daniel had preferred dramatic shadows. The conference table had been replaced with a modern one that seated everyone as equals, not the hierarchical setup Daniel had insisted upon. Richard Brennan stood at the presentation screen, his confidence restored now that he could present real numbers instead of Daniel's creative interpretations. The quarterly report showed our first genuinely profitable quarter in 2 years. No creative accounting, no hidden debts, no mysterious consulting fees draining our resources. Revenue is up 12%, Richard reported. Operating costs down 18% after eliminating redundant positions and suspicious consulting contracts. We've restored full transparency with all investors. My mother sat in the observer's chair, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of the legacy I now carried. She'd started attending board meetings after the restructuring, her experience invaluable in navigating the transition. When Richard finished, she leaned toward me. Your father would be impressed, she whispered, her hand briefly covering mine. You didn't just save the company. You made it legitimate. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval of the quarterly results. As board members filed out, Wallace stopped beside me. The Journal wants to do a feature, he said. About the transformation. They're calling it, the Whitmore Restoration. That afternoon I found a manila envelope on my desk with familiar handwriting. Daniel's monthly letter. I'd been receiving them since he'd moved into his downtown studio apartment, each one a testament to his unraveling. The first letter had been defiant, insisting I would regret the divorce, that no court would side with me. The second angry, calling me vindictive and cruel. The third attempted negotiation. If I dropped the fraud investigation, he'd give up all claims to Emma. The fourth was pure depression, written on motel stationery after Sierra had left him for a cryptocurrency entrepreneur she'd met in Los Angeles. This latest one was different. Shorter. The handwriting steadier. Lydia. You were always the strong one. I see that now. I was just too arrogant to notice I was standing in your shadow, not casting my own. Daniel. I filed it with the others in the box marked evidence, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy. The opposite of love wasn't hate. It was indifference. And I had become beautifully indifferent to Daniel Clark. That evening, Emma and I sat at our kitchen table, the same one where Daniel had ignored us for his phone just months ago. She was working on an essay about women in business, and she'd chosen to write about me. Mom, she said, looking up from her laptop, why did Dad choose someone else over us? The question I'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. I set down my coffee and considered my words carefully. Sometimes people get so caught up in what they think they want that they forget what they actually have, I said. Your father forgot that real partnership isn't about who gets credit. It's about building something together. Margaret, who'd come for Sunday dinner and stayed to help Emma with her essay, added her own wisdom. Your mother didn't just take back money, Emma, she said, her judge's voice carrying weight even at our kitchen table. She took back her life. She took back her story. That's the real power. Emma nodded solemnly, then her face brightened with the resilience of youth. Can we get a dog now? She asked. Dad was always allergic, but now. Margaret and I burst into laughter, real, genuine laughter that filled our house for the first time in years. It wasn't cruel laughter at Daniel's expense, just the pure joy of realizing how many small freedoms had been returned to us. Yes, I said. We can get a dog. Later that week, Emma and I visited the animal shelter and came home with a golden retriever named Fortune, after my father's favorite saying. Fortune took to the house immediately, claiming Daniel's former study as her favorite napping spot. It felt like poetic justice. The divorce finalized quietly. Daniel didn't contest it, he couldn't afford to once the forensic accountants finished their review. He'd been siphoning funds for years, small amounts he thought wouldn't be noticed. Nothing criminal, but enough to forfeit any claim to alimony or shared assets. He kept his car and his clothes. I kept everything else. His LinkedIn profile now read, "Seeking new opportunities," a euphemism for unemployable in any major firm. Word had spread through the industry about how Meridian had really been built. No one wanted to hire a man who'd stolen credit from his wife for 7 years. Sierra's story took a different turn. Her Instagram showed her reinventing herself as a lifestyle influencer in Los Angeles, posting motivational quotes about resilience and starting over. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was teaching lessons she'd learned the hard way about trying to build a life on someone else's foundation. In my CO office, I kept exactly 2 photographs on my desk. The first showed 3 generations of Whitmore women, my grandmother, my mother, and me, taken at the family estate the day after the board approved my leadership. We stood in the library where Mother had shown me those documents. 3 women who understood that real power wasn't given but taken. The second photograph was actually a framed document, the offer letter Daniel had signed giving Sierra my position. Below it, I'd written in my own hand, "Never confuse access to power with actually possessing it." Every morning, I looked at both reminders of the journey from invisible benefactor to visible leader. Some days, young employees would ask about them during meetings. I would tell them the story not as gossip but as a lesson. About knowing your worth. About documenting your contributions. About never letting anyone else narrate your story. Meridian's stock had doubled under my leadership. We'd expanded into 3 new markets, hired 40 new employees based solely on merit, and established a mentorship program for young women in finance. The Wall Street Journal had featured us as a comeback story of the year, though I preferred to think of it as a beginning, not a comeback. As I sat in my office one evening watching the sunset paint the city gold, Emma texted me a photo. She'd won first place in the science fair with her renewable energy project, the one Daniel had ignored over dinner months ago. Her smile radiated pride, and beside her, Margaret held Fortune's leash, our dog wearing a ridiculous congratulations bandana. This was success. Not the hollow victories Daniel had chased, built on other people's efforts. This was real, earned, and entirely ours. The Whitmore fortune wasn't just preserved. It was finally in the hands of someone who understood its true value. The money had never been about luxury or status. It was about independence, about the power to choose your own path. I'd spent 7 years as Daniel's silent partner, invisible benefactor, the woman behind the man. Now I was simply Lydia Whitmore, so mother and architect of my own destiny. If this story of calculated revenge resonated with you, please hit that like button right now. My most satisfying moment was watching Daniel realize those 14 institutional investors were all my family's accounts. What was your favorite moment of justice? Share it in the comments below. Don't miss more stories of women reclaiming their power. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story of triumph over betrayal.